Hey guys, I'm once again joined by my friend Jeremy, and we're doing a movie review. I initially had another review planned for this, but with the recent passing of Roger Corman, I figured, I gotta review one of his movies, and I figured, why not review one of my personal favorite Roger Corman movies, that being Tales of Terror from 1962. Now, Tales of Terror is a 1962 anthology horror film directed by Roger Corman and based on several stories by classic horror author Edgar Allan Poe. Now, this is actually part of a series of Edgar Allan Poe adaptations that Corman did in the early 60s, which also includes The House of Usher, The Pin and the Pendulum, The Mask of the Red Death, and The Raven. Some people lump Corman's movie The Haunted Palace into that grouping as well, but The Haunted Palace was actually an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation that was sold as a Poe movie. Now, outside of his Edgar Allan Poe movies, Roger Corman also directed movies like The Terror, Creature from the Haunted Sea, A Bucket of Blood, and of course the original The Little Shop of Horrors. But he was also a very prolific producer, and actually a lot of people working in Hollywood owe their careers to Corman. People like Jack Nicholson, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, James Cameron, all got their start working under Corman. Now, Tales of Terror was also written by Richard Matheson, the same Richard Matheson who wrote books like I Am Legend, What Dreams May Come, and Hell House. He also wrote some of the most famous episodes of The Twilight Zone, like Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, Little Girl Lost, and Death Ship. So what do you think of Tales of Terror?
Oh, it's a very good film. It was perfectly creepy and eerie, and I also liked the production design of it.
Yeah.
You know, that was just perfectly added to the creepy effect.
Corman had kind of a reputation for being, kind of a cheap filmmaker. Like, a lot of his movies during this time period were made on the cheap. But his Poe movies show that this guy was a real filmmaker, and he really... I think the Poe movies are just visually beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
And I would rank them right alongside, the films that Hammer was doing around the time.
Yeah.
In a way, they almost feel like American Hammer films. Now, Tales of Terror is probably my favorite of the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe adaptations. Now, have you seen any of the other Poe movies that Corman did?
Yeah, I've seen The Raven with Boris Karloff.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
Jack Nicholson. I've seen that one. I believe I saw Mask of the Red Death many years ago.
Now, Tales of Terror is essentially 3 short films rolled together into one movie, each one based on a different Edgar Allan Poe story, and Vincent Price plays a different character in all 3 of the stories. Now, one thing I do love about Tales of Terror is even though it's based on classic literature like Edgar Allan Poe, it does have a very distinct comic book feel to it. It really does have the feel of an EC horror comic. The first segment of the film is Morella, which is based on the 1835 Edgar Allan Poe story of the same name. Now, the first segment follows a young woman named Leona, played by Maggie Pierce, who goes to see her father, played by Vincent Price, who she hasn't seen since she was a child. Actually, she never really knew her father, because her father abandoned her when she was only an infant. And the reason for this, as she soon learns from her father, is because her mother Morella died shortly after giving birth to her and blamed the baby for her death. Eventually, Leonora and her father do try to reconnect with each other, but it turns out the vengeful spirit of Morella will not be denied. What do you think of this segment?
It's pretty scary, I think. First of all, the look of it, like we said before, adds to its creepy effect. And, the fact, when you first see the dead body, that's a very scary shot.
Yes. Now, I have read the short story that this is based on, and it's been a long time since I've read the original Edgar Allan Poe story, but from what I remember, it's sort of the same premise, except it's more like the mother dies while giving birth to the child, and then sort of as the child gets older, she starts to look freakishly like Morella. It's sort of a reincarnation story in a way. The movie obviously changes a few things and embellishes a few things, but I'll be honest, this is probably my least favorite of the 3 segments, but it's still really damn good. And it's so well acted from Vincent Price. And he really does sell it as this like grief-stricken father. And
Vincent Price, he was great in everything he did.
Yes.
I have a photo signed by him. A friend who had a big collection of all kinds of memorabilia was nice enough to give me a photo that was signed by Vincent Price.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
And Maggie Pierce is very sympathetic as Lenora, especially when we find out a certain revelation about her character. The second, and in my opinion, best segment of the movie is The Black Cat, which is actually an amalgamation of 2 Edgar Allan Poe stories, that being The Black Cat and The Cask of Amontillado. Now, what the plot of this segment is we follow this abusive alcoholic named Montresor, who one day wanders into a wine tasters convention, and he challenges this guy named Fortunato to a wine tasting competition, and this ultimately culminates in Fortunato having to take Montresor home because Montresor is drunk off his ass, and then Fortunato meets Montresor's wife, and let's just say the 2 of them get jiggy with it, and Montresor eventually finds out about this affair and buries them both inside the wall of his basement. A combination of Montresor's guilt and his alcoholism leads to these hallucinations, and I don't want to give away the ending, but let's just say his wife's black cat ends up being his ultimate nemesis in the story.
Now, what do you think of this segment?
It's another very good segment, and I have read The Cask of Amontillado. It's very good, and
what about The Black Cat?
I haven't read that one.
Yeah, I've read both stories. Again, this sort of like, it takes both those stories and sort of merges them together into one. But yeah, I thought this segment was absolutely hilarious.
It is a bit. I mean, Peter Lorre, that's mainly because of Peter Lorre's performance when he's drunk.
Oh, yes, yes.
He's a mess.
I love when he's like walking down the street going, "Who that? Who that? Who's that knocking at my door? That's you, sir." Or like, and this is before he goes to the wine tasters convention, but like I love that part where he's wandering the streets looking for money, and he just like goes up to these 2 women. "Do you ladies happen to have some spare change for a moral cripple?" Or when he goes to the one guy going, "I want money." And what I love about it is he's a complete asshole to his wife, and like he is basically the villain of the story, yet Peter Lorre plays him in such a way where I kind of like this guy, even though he's a complete asshole.
I also love the wine tasting sequence in this movie. It's such a great comedic sequence in the film, especially with how Peter Lorre and Vincent Price play off of each other in that scene. And Vincent Price is so freaking good as Fortunato, just because of how much of a snob he is, contrasted with how much of a slob Peter Lorre's character is. And that scene, which was not in either of the Edgar Allan Poe stories, has some great writing from Richard Matheson, who I thought was a fantastic writer in his own right.
Yeah, I mean, that's an entertaining scene for sure, and I always wondered how you could tell what year a wine is from just by tasting it. I mean, how does that work? Yeah, I mean, when he hallucinates that Fortunato and his wife are taunting him, that's actually really creepy.
Yes, yes. Especially when they pull Montresor's head off.
Yep, and they play catch with it.
Yeah.
Now, a few years ago, I actually went to Edgar Allan Poe's house in Philadelphia, which is now a museum, and I was actually in the basement that supposedly inspired the basement from the original Black Cat story. The tour guide even mentioned this movie when talking about the basement. The third and final segment of the movie is The Case of M. Valdemar, which is based on Edgar Allan Poe's 1845 story, The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar. Valdemar. Now, I've never read the original story, so I can't comment on what some of the major differences are, but this segment is about a man named Mr. Valdemar, played by Vincent Price, who is dying, so he seeks the help of a hypnotist, played by Basil Rathbone, to basically take his pain away from him. The hypnotist agrees in exchange for an experiment. Basically, he wants to see if he can keep Valdemar conscious even past the point of death, and he also kind of wants to see what happens to us after we die. But this experience turns out to be quite hellish for Mr. Valdemar, and now the hypnotist will not let him go unless Valdemar agrees to let him marry his wife.
What do you think of this one?
It's probably my least favorite, but it's still very good.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. I will say it definitely drags a little bit. Or I don't even want to say it drags a little bit, but it is the longest. But what I liked about this one is it has some very effective and very creepy scenes. Like, there's this part where Valdemar is sort of describing what he's seeing, and it's sort of implied that he's seeing hell, because like he says something to the effect of he's seeing people, multitudes and multitudes of people, and just the way he describes it is so freaking creepy. Basil Rathbone plays a great villain in this segment.
Yeah, he does a great job.
Yes. And you feel bad for Valdemar's wife in the movie, too, because, like, she's basically the main villain of the segment is basically trying to rape her, let's be real, you know?
Yeah, she's being victimized.
And the ending of this segment, where, spoiler, Mr. Valdemar becomes a zombie, I don't know if that was in the original short story or not, but it feels like something right out of EC Comics.
I think because this is the longest segment, I could see why somebody might think this one drags a little bit, but I think it's solid. Any closing thoughts on Tales of Terror overall?
It's a great movie. It's very creepy. You should check it out.
But yeah, Tales of Terror, it's definitely my favorite of Corman's Poe movies, and it's one of my favorite anthology horror films in general, and it's one of my favorite horror films from the 1960s. And the film is just a testament to how great of an actor Vincent Price was, that he was able to seamlessly play three very distinctly different characters all in the same movie. I also want to point out the music in the film by Les Baxter, especially the music playing in the end credits, is freaking fantastic.
Yeah, and I also love the beating heart.
Yes, that is
present throughout. And Vincent Price's narration is just perfect. Spot on for this kind of movie.
I agree. Around the time the movie came out, or maybe it was a little afterwards, there actually was a comic book adaptation of this movie, as well as a novelization of the film, which is interesting because it's already based on a literary work. I've always found that to be so redundant when they do a novelization based on a movie that was already based on a book, you know what I mean? I also wanted to point out, I don't know this for sure, but I swear George Romero and Stephen King must have seen this movie. Even though Creepshow was definitely based on EC Comics, there are little things in this movie that I swear Creepshow borrowed from, because in the movie, when each segment ends, it ends with a freeze frame, and then it's sort of a drawing, and that's very similar to how each segment in Creepshow ended, where it ended with a freeze frame, and then it became a comic book. Yeah. And even, like, honestly, there are subtle similarities between the Black Cat segment, and then the Something to Tide You Over segment in Creepshow. So yeah, guys, that was our review of Roger Corman's Tales of Terror, and bye.